Hello, and welcome to Just a Dog podcast. I am your host, Nadine. Before I introduce this week's guest, I wanted to let you know that starting this week, this podcast will move to a bi-weekly schedule. Slowing down a little means that I can give each episode the care and the depth that it deserves, to find the right guests, to ask better questions, and to keep learning along the way. New episodes will be out every other Thursday, with occasional bonus episodes in between. In this episode, I speak with Jenna Miller, Chair of the Board of Trustees at Spirit of the Dog Rescue. With over 15 years of experience in animal care, Jenna has worked across every corner of the rescue world, from large national organisations to small independents. She brings an honest, grounded perspective on what rescue really looks like behind the scenes, the systems, the heartbreak, and the hope. In this conversation, we talk about what happens when a dog enters rescue, the impact of unregulated rescues, and the realities of trying to keep families and dogs together in an overstretched system. We touch on compassion fatigue, fostering, and the misconceptions that shape how we see rescue dogs, and how much of this work is really about helping humans to see dogs more clearly as sentient beings navigating a very human world. On a personal note, I reached out to Jenna months ago, but as is so often the case in rescue, finding time is hard. So after months of trying, we finally made it happen. And I persisted for one reason. Jenna cares deeply. She has a rare mix of compassion, intelligence, and insight that I believe more people need to hear. This episode isn't about fundraising, but I realised afterwards that we didn't even talk about how people can help. Charities like Spirit of the Dog Rescue survive entirely on public support, and knowing Jenna's commitment firsthand, I can't think of a better cause. So if you ever find yourself unsure of what to gift someone who already has everything, a donation in their name to Spirit of the Dog Rescue might be a lovely alternative. You can make a donation via their website, spiritofthedogrescue.org.uk. I feel very lucky to have had this conversation, and I hope that there's something in it for you too. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Jenna. Enjoy. Jenna, hello. I'm so glad to have you on Just a Dog podcast. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, so good to see you.
Glad to finally have you on. Right. There's so much to cover, so let's get straight into it. I would love for listeners to understand a little bit about your journey and what brought you to this, where you are today.
Well, I've always wanted to work with animals. So I studied animal management at college and went into animal care roles and found it quite difficult really to find an animal care job that really aligned with my ethics and my values. So I tried lots of different things. I worked in boarding kennels on site of a seized dog unit where the police send dogs that they've seized under Section 103 of the Dangerous Dogs Act. I've worked at boarding kennels that I lived on site of, council pounds. And then I got the opportunity to work at the largest canine welfare organisation in the UK, which was amazing. And alongside that, worked at an independent rescue with a lot more dogs. And it was a real stark contrast, really, to see an organisation with huge amounts of money and one with very little, both seemingly trying to achieve the same thing. And over time, I got to know lots of different independent rescues and volunteered for all sorts of different ones that operate in different ways to try and really get a deeper understanding of how the system works. And eventually ended up at the organisation I'm at now, Spirit of the Dog Rescue. And I started off as a kennel carer for the dogs, and then was asked to be a committee member, and then a trustee, and then eventually charity chair, which is what I do now.
Amazing. So within the framework of a rescue, like what are the types of roles that you would typically get? Is that what you've just listed, like the natural progression up?
Well, with not all rescues are registered charities. So within a registered charity, you have a chair of the board of trustees. You have your trustees, your committee, and then everyone else. And it depends what setup you've got. You might have kennel managers, you might have secretaries and admin people. And here's the sound effects. My dog's just having a drink down here. So yeah, and you've obviously got fundraisers, people that do transport run. Sometimes you have medically trained people, behaviourists, trainers. So there's so many different roles and so many different people that come together to make a rescue what it is, really.
That's incredible. So with yours, your rescue is independent as I understand it, right?
Yeah.
And how many people do you have working in this rescue?
Well, we're all volunteers. It's completely run by volunteers. So we don't have any staff, but probably about 30, including all the fundraisers.
Wow. Okay. It's
Yeah,
much bigger than I thought it was.
yeah, lots of people are sort of casual or part-time. Where obviously it's not a paid role. Sometimes people can increase their hours, have to decrease them, depending on their other commitments. But yeah, we honestly couldn't run without volunteers and public support.
That's awesome. So in general, how would your rescue compare to others? So you're kind of smaller and independent other than size. How are you different from other rescues?
The main thing that we take pride in is the behaviour support aspect and the emotional well-being support for the dogs and ongoing for the adopters. So, Spirit of the Dog was originally called Spirit of the Dog Rehabilitation Fund when it was registered. And the idea was to raise money for a purpose built rehab centre for dogs, last chance dogs, as they would call them back then, and for guardians, dog guardians in the local community to come and be trained in how to understand their dog, to try and keep families together if people are wanting to give a dog up for behavioural things that they're struggling to cope with, and also to do work matching dogs that come into the rescue with their adopters. So that was the original aim. And that was 20 years ago that they started. They wanted to help dogs in the meantime before they got premises. So they were using what we call EB, emergency boarding kennels. So this is kennels much like you would use if you were to go on holiday and board your dog somewhere. And yeah, they work with rescues and you rent the space at the kennels. And a good rescue who's using EB will go and work with the dogs at the kennels, spend lots of time there. And that will be their base that they're working from. So they don't have the overheads of their own site, but they still have a registered license boarding kennels to use to keep their dogs. So the dogs are at the boarding kennels. Sometimes they're in foster homes. And where the charity was founded by a behaviourist, those behaviourists would then work with the dogs and use their expertise to help the outreach dogs and the dogs that were under the rescue. That's kind of evolved over time. We did have an opportunity to build our own kennel site in 2024 and had great funding for it. Unfortunately, it fell through. So we are still using, I know it's still using EB kennels, but it's kind of worked out for the best up until now. It's been a really good setup and it has worked well. So when the founders retired and I became chair, I'm not a behaviourist myself. So I've been recruiting amazing qualified people, trainers, behaviourists, animal therapists, all kinds of amazing people who volunteer their time to work with the dogs. So when we get a dog come in under our care, we find out what their needs are and we curate them their own personalised wellbeing team. So that will be usually a behaviourist, and it depends on what they need. If they are matted and worried about grooming, they'll have a fear-free groomer. So it really depends what they need, and then we get the support around them. And that team stays with the dog through the adoption process and post-adoption as well, because the last thing we really want is any of our dogs to come to harm's way because their adopter has taken advice from a trainer who can't be trusted, obviously, with it being completely unregulated in the training world too. So something that we care a lot about is using up-to-date methods and compassionate and science.
So typically, would dogs come straight to you and you would find an emergency kennel and then you would find someone to adopt them? Or how does that process typically work? When, let's imagine, someone gives you a phone call and says, "Oh, we've got, you know, um, Bruno. needing a home? Like, walk me through your process typically. And I know that every case is different, but yeah.
Exactly, yeah. Every case is different. So we'd first assess their needs. Have we got a sort of poorly elderly dog with no behaviour concerns that needs to go straight into a foster home? Have we got a dog who's finding life really tricky and we need to do more thorough assessments? Ideally, if a foster is available and that is safe and that's the right thing to do, then we would assess them in situ where they are and make sure that everything's safe and put all of the right training and support in around that foster home. If they go to emergency boarding kennels, then we start off by letting them decompress, getting to know them, and then we would start introducing them to new people and different things and taking them out. And then we get to know a lot more about them. When we start looking at homes, we really want the adopters to come to visit the dogs, and then I will take the dogs to their home. And so they'll do a few visits with me there, and the dog will just come with me. So it's just like any other day out for the dogs. It's not about putting them straight in a home and then just leaving them there. Because by this point, they're starting to build a bond with me and they're starting to trust me. So they're just going on a day out with me. And then when the dog and the people start to feel really comfy, I'll leave them alone for a little while, but I'm in my van outside getting on with some admin and by my phone in case they need anything. When that starts going well and they're ready to have a sleepover, this is usually at the point where people know that they're going to commit, because we don't want dogs getting passed around and having overwhelm, not knowing where they are from one day to the next. So once the people are really comfy, then they have a sleepover, and that kind of rolls into a pre-adoption settling in period and then into adoption.
That's incredible. It is so thorough as well. I love how much you care about these dogs. I remember seeing a video, a couple of videos actually recently, and I absolutely love your videos, by the way. If anybody
Thank
hasn't seen it, go to Spirit of the Dog Rescue's Instagram page, or we also have Dog Rescue Diaries. It's another page that Jenna manages. And yeah, she documents stories about certain cases or certain dogs over time. And I think the last one was Jack. And that was just such an emotional, incredible story. I would love for you to share just, I know this is has potential to be really long, but like just some of the key things about Jack, and the outcome.
Well, Jack was called into us by a member of the public who said, I've been made homeless and I need help. Can you take my German Shepherd? And I said, well, we don't have space at the moment, but what I can do is put up a post to go out to rescue contacts and colleagues to see if anyone else has got space, and I'll let you know. So the last thing I want to do is not be able to help a dog and leave someone in the lurch. So I'll always try and do something. Usually that's trying to keep a dog with the person. So we've got a food bank scheme, we've got outreach projects, we've got things to try and keep families together, but that wasn't going to work in this case. So I put a post up and contacted some shepherd rescues that I know. And then I got a tip off that all wasn't as it seemed with Jack, and he'd actually just come out of police kennels. He'd been seized over a year ago, and he'd been deemed a very dangerous dog. Allegedly, he'd attacked a police officer. None of this had been disclosed. And this is why it's very common for people to not disclose information like this, which is why I'm always telling people, please don't just go and get a dog off Facebook sales or Gumtree. Chances are people have got to the point where they're lying about serious behaviours. So yeah, it all started coming out that it wasn't as it seemed. And then I contacted his owner back. We were to-ing and fro-ing, and she said, yeah, look, he did. That is true. He has just come out of police kennels, but it wasn't his fault. And then the story started to unfold as I got hold of the solicitor's paperwork and all the court documents, and really sort of had to dig deep to find out what was the truth in all of this, with poor Jack stuck in the middle. And it turned out that he hadn't attacked the police officer. They'd climbed over the fence into his garden and tasered him. And they'd also used the pava spray on him, which is like a stingy, awful thing that goes in their eyes, which makes their eyes burn. And then they'd actually tasered him twice and then taken him away on a catch pole to the vet to have the barbs removed from the taser, and then locked him up in police kennels for a year. And because he'd been deemed dangerous, nobody took him out for walks. He didn't have any yard time. He was literally in his kennel. And there's a shutter door in between the kennel and the run. And he would go from one side to the other, and they'd shut the door, clean that side, let him through. shut it, clean that side. And that's all he had for over a year. And then he'd been home 10 days and he was in our inbox. So as it all unraveled, we decided we were going to work with Jack and let him tell us who he was. There was so much conflicting information, and really the only person we hadn't asked at this point was Jack. So we wanted to get to know him, and the video diary series is what that looked like and how he got on. And it got to the point where he was doing so well. It was obviously very clear that he was not a dangerous dog, as he'd been described. He didn't really know much about the outside world. Things were overwhelming for him, and he needed some help with that. But he wasn't a dangerous dog at all. And so we worked with our colleagues. New Hope Rescue said that they had the perfect placement for him and he could go there. And so, yeah, that's where he is now. He's over at New Hope, and they've got loads of land there. It's a beautiful place for him to be. And he's not in a kennel anymore. It's more like a bedroom with sofas in it, with his little radio on. So, yeah, it's the perfect spot for him right now. And that was a good bit of teamwork, really. And I'm very, very grateful to New Hope for opening up that space for him. It's really important that rescues work together where possible if you've got the right setup for a dog. But yeah, it just goes to show that you can't believe everything that you hear about a dog.
Yeah, unfortunately. What are some of the risks? I remember a couple of months ago, somebody contacted me basically saying that the dog's owner had been struggling with substance abuse over an extended period, and she was quite young anyway. And so the mother, who was also a cabin crew, was left with the dog for the majority of time, and she couldn't take care of him anymore. So they wanted to find someone who would take the dog. And I remember actually considering taking it and then thinking, oh, perhaps the next day I could go find a rescue who would potentially be able to take the dog. And if it wasn't for the fact that I had a direct line to you and you raising a couple of issues with me, I wouldn't have had that level of awareness. So, do you remember that conversation?
Yeah, I do.
What were some of those risks that you discussed with me?
At the moment, rescues are full. Rescues are full to bursting. You can barely get a rescue space for newborn puppies. I've been trying to get a rescue space over the last few days for two elderly Jack Russells, age 11 and 15, whose owner has died. And I cannot get them in anywhere for love nor money right now. So when members of the public want to help a dog, and they have this romantic idea of, I'll bring them home and then I'll just get them into, I'll just call a rescue and someone will pick them up. That's not necessarily going to happen. And there was a good chance that you would have had that dog in your home indefinitely. And the thing is, you've got a good home there. You've got a loving home. You're a responsible person. As soon as you were going to take that dog and bring them into your home, that dog's no longer urgent to anybody because that dog would have been safe in your home. So no one would have been coming to help. It would have been quicker to get that dog into a rescue where they were while they were still urgent. So that's the tricky thing. And if you weren't in a position to take that dog long term, a lot of people do this and then end up with a dog in their home who is panicking, biting, horrendous separation anxiety, destroying the place, being really noisy. They're in rented accommodation, the neighbours complain, and they end up in just as desperate a situation as the person they were trying to help. So the best thing is always to get a rescue first to help you. Even if you want to foster, get that rescue to be your backup. Because once a decent rescue is offered on a dog, what they're doing is they're promising that dog safety for the rest of their life. When you're a rescue, if you take a dog, you're not thinking, can I rehome this dog and wash my hands? What you're agreeing to is being responsible for that dog for the rest of their life. I've got dogs out there, 2-year-old collies out there. I could get a phone call in 15 years that something's happened to their adopters, and I would be responsible for going to get those dogs and making sure they're okay. Once you have a good rescue and you have your RBU, that protects you as the person who wants to take the dog on. So you could contact a rescue and say, I could be a foster home. I could be a long-term foster home, but I need rescue backup. That's the most responsible way to go about doing something like that. If you're not 100% committed that you could handle anything, and I'm including serious bites and all sorts in that.
Yeah, so that would have been really risky.
Medical stuff as well. We had a lady contact us about Nancy the sausage dog, who's another one of our recent dogs. And she was just looking after Nancy for a lady who'd lost her home. But Nancy had an ulcerated, infected eyeball. to the point where it was a real welfare issue. And the lady who'd offered to foster didn't have the money to go to the vets, and neither did her owner. So she had to reach out for advice, and it was getting to the point where she could actually get prosecuted under the Animal Welfare Act for
For
having a dog in.
neglect.
Yeah, even though she was trying to foster and just trying to help, but she didn't have the money for the vet. She had her own dogs that were insured and she could cover that, but she couldn't cover for this other dog. And it was getting to the point where this foster lady who just wanted to help get a dog out of a situation could have ended up prosecuted under the Animal Welfare Act herself. And then Nancy ended up signed over to us, and we're probably nearly up to £1,000 in medical bills just now.
Oh man, that's
There's
tough.
lots to consider, lots to consider.
It sounds really complex. And there's so much that, if you don't know, you don't know. So unless you have experience with that, or you can ask someone, you wouldn't really. I never understood, and I to some degree still don't, like the factors that go into, like, everything that goes into gets taken into consideration when the call comes through, and then that
Mm.
process to, like, decide to take on the dog. And it kind of makes sense why, for a lot of larger rescue organizations and charities, their processes and procedures are so rigid. Yeah.
Yeah, there's lots of different types of organisations. So you have like an open intake type shelter where they are essentially council pounds and they have to take any dog who comes through the door, like Battersea. But then you've got rehoming centres like Dogs Trust who are not, they don't, or when I worked there, they didn't identify as a rescue, they identified as a rehoming centre. That's not the same as a council pound and open intake shelter. So there's lots of different types of organisations. And you don't necessarily know, most of the public don't necessarily understand the difference of what they're ringing and what that organisation's there to do.
Yeah, 100%, because I didn't understand that at all. I assumed wrongly that if you call a rescue, they say bring the dog, they take the dog and they put them in the back. You know what I mean? Until they can find someone, perhaps having people come in every day, take a stroll and see what dogs they, are ready to adopt. I know that's quite a naive way of looking at it, but if you don't know, you don't know, really. So
One of the first rescues that I worked for ran exactly like that. And they just literally had a barn full of dogs in cages, and people were just walking around and going, yeah, I'll take that one, and taking them home. That's not a reputable practice. Um, Not checking anyone and just letting people walk out with dogs. But that's how that worked.
yeah.
There's still places that do things like that. It's not good, but they exist because rescue's not regulated right now.
What is the latest update, as far as you're aware, with regards to the petition that recently closed?
Yeah, the petition's ended. It got over 100,000 signatures, so it can technically be debated in Parliament now. And Richard Holden, the MP, has been amazing trying to push that through. Now all we can do really is wait and see. Hold our breaths and hope that happens.
Have you seen any legislation passed previously? How long does that typically take?
Well, when it came to banning XL bullies, they pushed that through very quickly. When it came to Lucy's Law, it took over 10 years. It really depends what the priorities are at the time, I think. But yeah, rescue regulations already come into place in Scotland. Hopefully Wales soon too. And then England, fingers crossed, will follow on quickly after that.
Why is it, for people who might not know, why is it important to have rescue regulations?
So right now, anyone watching this today can start a Facebook page and call themselves an animal rescue. You don't need to have any qualifications. You don't need to have any training. If you don't insure your organisation, obviously we have public liability, we have indemnity insurance, we have all sorts of layers of things that protect dogs, adopters and our volunteers. You don't have to have anything like that. You could stack dogs up in cages in your one-bedroom flat. You could have 30 dogs stacked up in cages in your one-bedroom flat and be selling them on the internet and calling yourself a rescue, misappropriating funds, sticking them in your back pocket. You could be getting hold of dogs for any kind of nefarious purposes and calling yourself a rescue. And there have been cases where, if you're sensitive, close your ears for a minute. But there have been cases where people have called themselves a rescue to acquire dogs to take them into fighting rings, or for breeding, or just selling them for profit. So there's really are lots of dodgy things that go on in the whole spectrum of different rescues. You've got the good ones, the not so good ones, the people that are well-meaning and don't really know what they're doing, which are obviously still very dangerous, and then the outright sinister. And all of these can call themselves a rescue. So we really need to put a stop to that and make sure that there's a process to go through to make it harder for criminals to use this as a way to easily acquire dogs and money.
Amazing. So that as a byproduct of that, let's say that those regulations came into play, it would impact quite a lot of organizations because they would have to go through legitimate channels to meet whatever requirements are set out at the time. Do you think that that poses a risk for it not to potentially get passed or like move forward?
I'd like to think the priority would be the safety of the public, which this directly impacts, and the safety of the dogs within the system. I think that's the most important thing. We can't be worrying about people's feelings at a time like this. We just need to get the job done and make sure that the public and the dogs are safe. So it should really just be about that. I mean, I do think there's a lot of good rescues that are worried that they're going to be impacted negatively, especially if they then need their pens to be slightly bigger and they haven't got the money to knock down a whole block and rebuild. Or there's probably a few reasons why legitimate rescues might have some concerns, but I genuinely think that if you're doing everything right and doing everything well, you've got nothing to worry about. And I'm sure it would be a phased process of introducing all these things. There's plenty of time to fundraise and get anything done that needs to be done.
Yeah, fingers and toes crossed. I remember coming to know of you through AppDog at the State of UK Rescue meeting in the Houses of Parliament. And you were such an eloquent speaker when you represented your rescue and telling people about some of the challenges that rescues face. And I remember, I don't know if it was you or somebody else, they were saying that rescues receive anything up to 150 phone calls a day. And some of those people, especially when they're turned away, they'll say, if you don't take my dog, I'm going to hurt the dog or I'm going to hurt myself. Have you had any kind of situations that were that extreme in your experience so far?
That may well have been me that said that. Yeah, I think we all have. I think anyone answering a rescue's phone is dealing with things like that. The larger organisations have got like counselling in place for people that answer their phones. For us independent rescues, that phone's in my pocket all day, and I'm dealing with that all day long. And it is tricky because one of our lovely admin ladies said that she would help answer the surrender emails recently, and it only took a day or so for her to become very, very upset and distressed. So yeah, it's not great. People are really desperate. People are really desperate if they're losing their homes, or people that are terminally ill. Or, there's all sorts of reasons why you would be desperate to give a dog up. People are really struggling with their mental health, finances, all kinds of reasons, unfathomable reasons. And yeah, yeah, people do make threats to their own lives or to their dogs, and people have threatened to sensitive people, close your ears, like drown their dog. I'm going to drown my dog if you don't pick him up right now. Yeah, you hear all sorts of things because people ring it. And I think especially for us, much smaller rescues, because people will, the first thing they do is they ring the big boys that they've heard of. So they'll ring Dogs Trust, Battersea, Blue Cross, Wood Green, all of the big people that you might see on the telly. By the time they then get put onto the ADCH list, the Association of Dogs and Cats Homes list, which is a list of rescues who want to be regulated, who have chosen to be vetted and looked at and had everything gone through with a fine-tooth comb. That's the list that the big organisations will send people to because they can trust those rescues. They'll find little rescues like ours on there. And by the time they've gotten to us, they're very desperate. Sometimes people are ringing me, they've contacted over 150 organisations and been turned away, and by that point they're breaking. And that is also why people are telling big lies about a dog's temperament, because they've phoned up and said, my dog's got a serious bite history, I need you to come pick them up, because they think that if they're in danger, we're all obliged to run in and help them. when actually they realise that we can't even get little friendly elderly dogs or puppies into rescues right now. And they then start trying to hide the fact that that's been happening. And that puts adopters in danger, foster carers, shelter staff, puts us all at risk. So yeah, it's tricky, very tricky.
It's really sad. What are some of the systems that fail the people that ultimately impact and fail the dogs?
So many, like the intersectionality of all of these problems. It's vast. It is vast. Like the cost of living, people can't afford to care for themselves, like housing crisis, the mental health system, all sorts of things that impact people. If it impacts a person, it's going to impact the animals in their care. So, any sort of social issue that we see that's impacting people is going to impact the animals. There's not enough help for people in domestic violence situations, and accommodation for them, and safe places for them to go with their dogs. And it's vast. It's absolutely vast. Yeah.
So many. It's quite easy sometimes to feel hopeless. How do you kind of keep your edges soft or remain hopeful?
That's the tricky one because, we're all breaking at the moment in the sector. We're all really struggling. There's rescues closing down left, right, and centre. Sometimes lack of resources. Sometimes they just can't do it anymore because it's just too much. I think the most important thing is connecting with other people in the sector and knowing that you're not on your own. Even though you've got your own team, I think when you sort of reach out to the broader network and we're all in the same position and we're all there for each other, that to me is the most important thing. And spending time really being present with the animals and just constantly reminding yourself what you're doing this for and who you're doing this for. Yeah.
Let's say, for example, an individual or a family have some kind of extreme circumstances and they need to rehome their dog. What would a process typically look like? The proper channel, and then on top of that, how, if it did come to looking for rescues, how would they know that a rescue is legitimate and that their dog's not just going to be used for breeding or dog fighting or whatever?
Well, the first thing they probably would go and contact the larger organisations first. That's typically where people start. And then if they have no room or they can't help, they will then hand out the list of the Association of Dogs and Cats Homes. And you can just Google adch.org and come up with all of those rescues that have been vetted. And there's a lot of variety within that list, but at least they have all been vetted. So it's the safest place to start. Now, if someone calls me up, calls our rescue phone and wants advice, I'm going to be asking different questions. I want to know, what breed is your dog? What age are they? And what behaviour stuff have we got going on? Initially, that's what I want to know. Because if they say, for instance, I have a German Shepherd, I would say contact German Shepherd Rescue Elite. They might say, I have a French Bulldog. And I'll say, okay, you have a French Bulldog, but what behaviour stuff have we got going on? Because we've got French Bulldog rescues, but some of them won't touch behaviour issues. Some of them will. Maybe you need a bite history specialist. Maybe you need a rehab rescue. Are they a senior dog? Can they go to a senior dog rescue? Do they need foster care? Are they safe to go into foster care? Do they really need kennel rehab first? So we're looking at all of these. So these are all the things that I'm thinking when someone says to me, what rescue should I go to? Because there's so many different types. And I think that's really, really important for people to know. But it is hard. It's really hard for people to know. Sometimes I'll get a message from someone saying, is this rescue reputable? And I've never heard of them, and they've popped up out of nowhere. And I think, I don't know. So I'll go into a group chat full of rescues to say, can anyone vouch for this person? And sometimes no one's heard of them. Sometimes they say, oh yeah, they're really small, but they're amazing. So it's kind of an insider thing to know. That's what makes it so difficult for members of the public. And some dodgy rescues are really convincing. So I would say stick with the Association of Dogs and Cats Homes list, but understand that spaces are just so few and far between. So before I even start talking about what sort of rescue I would suggest people ring, I want to know Is this a behaviour thing? Can we get you free or low cost behaviour support? Is this a financial thing? Can we put you on our food bank? Can we get you low cost vet services? What can we do to try and keep your dog with you? And that's the most important thing at the moment, is trying to keep your dog with you. Because even if a dog can get into a rescue, there's so few people adopting since lockdown that some dogs are sitting in kennels for 2, 3 years,
Oh.
longer. And some organisations obviously will have a policy that if a dog is struggling and not coping in the kennels, they'll be euthanised for their own well-being, for their own welfare. So when people call up and say, well, I'm working longer hours now, and I say, well, is your dog distressed? Are they crying, barking? No, I just feel sorry for them sat on the sofa all day. I think, well, at a lot of places, your dog's going to sit for 23 and a half hours a day in a kennel, in a noisy kennel block, for God knows how long. And I just wish people would take more responsibility and understand that rescue's not a magic fix.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are some amazing places that are very homely for dogs and, you know, have an amazing setup where your dog would be really happy, but the spaces are so few and far between. And I just urge anyone who's thinking of getting a dog to really consider all of these things. You know, rescues are just typically used as a dumping ground for people that just think, oh, is this too much like hard work? Or this isn't what I signed up for. I know I was going to be dealing with these behaviours, and they just want rescues to jump in and deal with it. We don't have the capacity anymore. We, like, in the last 10 years, things have gotten so bad. So the first thing is, don't get a dog in the first place if you're not prepared for all of these things. Do everything you can to keep your dog with you. And if you are desperate for somewhere for them to go, understand that the spaces are not there, but you have to keep trying for the reputable ones. But also, you can never privately rehome your dog. That is just completely irresponsible and unsafe because of all the hands that they could get into.
Yeah, so basically they shouldn't be going on Facebook saying, "Who can take my dog? I can't look after my dog anymore."
Definitely, no matter how desperate you get. And unfortunately, a saying that I've been using a lot is, you know, there are worse things in life than death. And I will never tell someone to go and put their dog to sleep. I think there's a million things you can do before you get to that point. I would never tell anyone to do that. I will always give them their options. But if you're going to hand your dog to a stranger on the internet and never see them again and never know what's happened to them, all of those people who trusted their dogs with Save a Paw Rescue in Billericay, who then had to read as the newspapers explained that 41 dog corpses had been dug up in this guy's garden. And the frantic, there was over 100 missing dogs, people frantically desperate, wanting to know whether their dogs were one of the dead, one of the missing, whether they'd actually found their way into a home. And so many people don't know whatever happened to their dog. And yeah, and when you're privately rehoming, it's even worse. You just don't know. So yeah, I mean, the whole system's gridlocked, and it sounds really bleak, but it is really bleak. Yeah, it is really bleak.
So typically, so we're obviously coming up to Christmas soon. We're in October at the moment, and this weekend I was at Pets at Home and I heard someone, well, a man and woman, talk about how the puppies are right on track for Christmas. And I just felt like this chill. I don't know what their intentions are. Ultimately, you know, it could be their own puppies for, you know, I don't know. And it's hard to speculate. But Christmas is coming up, and a lot of people are potentially going to be trying to surprise their loved ones with a puppy for Christmas. Have you seen any kind of patterns around that kind of trends? What tends to happen throughout the year from a rescue perspective, typically?
Well, we've all heard the slogan, haven't we? A dog is for life, not just for Christmas. And if that wasn't a big issue, then they wouldn't have made it their slogan. So yeah, that is a big issue. January is always dump your dog month. And sometimes it's the puppies that they didn't really want. Sometimes it's the older dog in the house that's not coping with the puppy, and people, as you know, want to dump the older dog in the house. Bringing, like, Christmas is, for a lot of households, a really crazy time. There's trees in the house, there's presents, there's excitable children. It's not a normal time, you know, and to bring a dog into a home during that time is a really tricky thing sometimes for them to navigate, depending on how they are as an individual. Yeah, I just wish people wouldn't run into these decisions. I think a lot of people are very entitled and they just think, well, it's just what you do. You get a dog and either works out or it doesn't. And if not, we'll just send them to a rescue. I don't think anyone really gets a dog thinking we'll just send them to a rescue. But at the first time a sign of trouble, people do. They just want to give them up. So January is always a big one. And it's always the most difficult for adoptions and donations as well, because obviously everyone spent their money at Christmas and in the January sales and no one can donate. So that just makes it a double whammy for the rescues trying to pick up the pieces.
That's so hard right after Christmas. So nobody's got money. You're operating on limited funds, and then you've got increased demand for your help and support. That's a really tough place to be.
Yeah, I think summer as well is always a big one because it's summer holidays, the kids are at home. The dogs are not necessarily used to having school age kids at home all day, every day. Kids are winding the dog up, the dog's getting stressed. An incident is much more likely to happen when it's stinking hot weather and everyone's stressed and too hot. And then the kids are poking around with the dog. So we always get a big spike in the summer of especially parents that can't be bothered, really. They can't be bothered to work for it. They can't recognise the dog's perspective. The dog growled at my child, they've got to go. Well, yeah, the dog requested space. They used a normal communication method to not bite and to explain very clearly that they'd had enough. What's wrong with that? What happened to let sleeping dogs lie? So I would say if you're a parent and you really want a dog and, for your kids, I would say, if you just imagine your child with a dog, and if that dog growls at them, are you going to be having a tantrum wanting them out of your house? Because if you would, don't get a dog. Dogs need to be able to express themselves. And you need to, as a guardian of the child and the dog, understand when that child is being too much. You need to control your kids. And you need to make that a safe space for the dog. And if you can't do that and you're not prepared to do that, just don't get involved in the first place. Because why should a dog have to suppress how they feel and be frightened, be pushed around? And people who punish dogs for growling when they're just trying to communicate space in the most hands-off way possible, they're then going to cause a situation where that dog is going to escalate into a bite because they know no one's going to listen to that precursor, that growl. So yeah, summer's always a big one. People are ringing up all throughout the year, to be honest. Yeah.
Do you think it's better to foster before you buy?
I think fostering's a great idea. Yeah, for lots of reasons. You personally, you've got your first foster dog at the moment. And how do you find it as a foster carer? What have you learned throughout this process that you wouldn't have known if you jumped straight into adoption?
Oh, it's such an interesting question, actually, because I had a different vision of how it was going to be, especially if you're a single person and you are managing a very complex being, their environment and their needs and, that kind of thing. You kind of do need a support network. I think that's important. And I was really lucky to have you and your support network, who you've very graciously and generously connected me with. But yeah, lots of different things. You would typically think, okay, rescue dog. Everyone has an idea in their head what that looks like. But with Duna, she is a Galga, a Spanish Greyhound. She's fearful. She's going through her integration decompression period at the moment. Contextually, you've got to look at it. Okay, this is dog who lived and worked and raced and hunted in Spain, was taken in a vehicle over however many hours to come over to the UK to another foster home, and then from that foster home came to my home. So this poor dog doesn't know if it's coming or going, and it's just, I would imagine, looking for some consistency. So I am a committed fosterer, and she is the absolute center of my world right now until she shows a bit more of her character and I can see her growing in confidence. But there's another added layer to that where she has shown changes in her gait, which means that maybe her legs are going, and that could potentially explain why she was given up by her galguero in the first place. When a rescue gets the dog, they do tests, many of them do, but they don't always know everything about the history of the dog, and it could be that things show up later along the line. So her nervousness could be because, new environment, new people, learning to trust, all that kind of stuff. And then that added complexity of a potential injury. She could be in pain, contributing to that nervousness. And so me taking a firm but fair approach is just completely not it.
I think people just think, well, dog's got to fit in with you, and you've got to force them into that box. And if that's people's attitude, then they shouldn't be taking on a dog. We are keeping these animals captive in our homes. And what I think is really beautiful about watching you go through this process with Duna is that you're so curious every step of the way. You want to know as much as you can about how she's feeling and what's impacting her. And as soon as I said about, you know, laminate flooring and traction on the floor, and you're putting rugs down and you're booking in with the vets and making sure that her hips are okay, and trying to do everything that we can to make this experience as comfortable for her as possible, because she didn't ask to be here. I think it's really hard sometimes. Sometimes dogs walk straight into a home and it's like they've always been there, and it's super easy and they glide through. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way, and you do have to be prepared for all eventualities. So to go back to your original question, I think fostering is a great idea, because if you were going to temporarily foster Juna, you might think, okay, I'm here to be her stepping stone and to find out as much about her as possible to find her the right home. And you might, during that process, think, I actually wouldn't be able to take on a dog permanently who's not able to be left because I live on my own. Or I need a dog who has got a very, very good musculoskeletal system, because they would need to be able to navigate using stairs. Or there's all these things. You're not just learning about her, you're learning about yourself.
Yes.
Because when you're taking on a dog who's a commitment, you could be looking at 10 years, 15 years of your life. And yeah, you do want the right match. You want the right match for you as well as the right match for the dog. And a lot of our foster carers, we call them failed fosters, because they will foster a number of dogs and then eventually say, no, this one is my heart and soul, and they need to stay, and they'll end up adopting. So I think it's really good way to get to know a dog and to get them out of kennels and to be that stepping stone. And then ultimately, if they work out to be the perfect match for you, then they're already with you. You've got the rescue support. I don't see any downsides to fostering.
Same. I mean, yeah, it's exactly that. You realize so many different things. It's like I always say, you don't know what you don't know, and so these things kind of reveal themselves to you. How do you? What comes up when you are unsure or uncertain? What comes up for you emotionally when you just not understanding what they need, or when you're rushing and the dog isn't working with you and you can't communicate with each other. So you learn a lot in that process about yourself. You learn a lot about the dog. You learn a lot about the support system set up in society to help you look after, your animal. And you learn about your immediate network and also their morals and values and how they would approach things. There's so many different factors to consider, and also misconceptions. So now I would give that question back to you, because when I speak of a rescue dog, people have their own ideas about what that means or what that looks like. And people that I've spoken to who are considering buying dogs, I've been like, have you ever fostered before? Have you ever, why not adopt? Not in a judgy way, but just like, that's an option. And typically there's this misconception, I feel, when it comes to rescue dogs. So do you know kind of what some of those misconceptions are?
Yeah, I mean, obviously lots of people, there's a difference between rescue and rehoming. When people think of rescue dogs, they think RSPCA advert. They think abused, don't want to know you. Are they dangerous? Are they aggressive? Are they scared? Can they do the things that, do the things that you would envision your life involving with a dog? I think ultimately, every dog is different, and it's about finding the right match. And there's so many amazing dogs out there who are bomb-proof and ready to go. The difference between rescuing, taking a dog out of an awful situation, some of them bounce out of there very resilient and go straight into homes. Others don't. When it comes to rehoming, we got people who pass away or move abroad, and the dogs don't have any sort of problematic, what humans would consider problematic behaviours at all. Loads of dogs out there like that. But there are also increasing numbers of dogs who are struggling because there's really awful advice out there, really dangerous advice online, which I do think has been exacerbated by TikTok and all of the wannabe trainers that popped up during COVID, because obviously training and behaviour is completely unregulated too. And people are following this dangerous advice and making the world an even more difficult place for dogs to live in. And they're bullying these dogs in their own home, calling it training, not understanding the dog's perspective or their point of view. So, yeah, we are seeing increasing numbers of dogs who have been really psychologically damaged by these balanced trainers who are more interested in control and pushing a dog to complete a certain task than they are looking at dog-centered care and the emotional well-being of that dog and the emotional experience of that dog, which is ultimately what we need to be looking at and working with to get them where they need to be. So there's so much bad information out there. They're so easily accessible. The internet's the most accessible form of information that we have. A lot of people don't have the funds. And even if people do have the funds to go and get a trainer or a behaviourist, they don't necessarily know whether that person is trustworthy. They've got a fancy website and testimonials and posh videos on social media that seemingly show results. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of dogs that are being impacted by this. And I think as a society, we all need to step up. We need to be regulating trainers and behaviourists. We need to be doing more to bring more affordable vet care. Yeah, we just need to be supporting our dogs and our dog guardians out there. Because yeah, it's hard. There are a lot of misconceptions, but I think what people need to really realise is that like us, dogs are all individuals. They're all different, and your match will be out there in a rescue somewhere. I think people get very impatient. They want to adopt a dog. They want to take on a dog, and they want one tomorrow. They're not prepared to wait. So when the reputable UK rescues are saying, okay, well, let's get you on a list. Let's find you a right match. Let's do it properly. They say, oh, this is taking too long. I can get one flown in from Romania. They'll get dropped off on my doorstep next week in a van. Why should I wait for you? And then they do that, and with varying results. So it's hard. I think we have a throwaway society. I think people are very impatient. I think people want the perfect dog just delivered to the doorstep who's not allowed to put a foot wrong or have any opinions or have any feelings. And if they do, then they're on the chopping block. It's hard. There are some
Yeah.
also really great people out there, really fantastic adopters out there. But we are seeing increasing numbers of very impatient people with very unrealistic expectations.
Yeah, and especially like when it comes to rehoming dogs or dogs kind of just being discarded on the side of the street. Because I've recently, especially on places like Facebook, been seeing a lot more, of dogs just being found without, their collars on or their name tags. Um, just out of curiosity, before someone, so let's say somebody is considering rehoming their dog because of behavior issues, what could other reasons be that impact the dog's behavior that they might not be aware of?
Well, a Daniel Mills study has shown that around 80% of dogs who are displaying problem behaviours, anything from separation anxiety to full-on bites, is experiencing pain. And I think a lot of people dismiss that and they say, no, my dog's not in pain. My dog's seen a vet. My dog can run, jump, do this, do that. There's no way my dog's in pain. And that's incredibly unfair and untrue in a lot of cases. It's hard because when a vet is in a consult room with your dog, they've got 10, 15 minutes max. And that dog's got so much adrenaline going on that they're potentially hiding symptoms, hiding things. A lot of vets are actually not trained specifically in identifying and managing pain. That is a whole specialist area of veterinary medicine. And I think it's dismissed a lot. I think that a lot of people don't realise that resource guarding, all of these sorts of behaviours are symptoms of pain. They just, they just, there was some people that I was trying to help recently, their Labrador was resource guarding and the vet suspected maybe some hip dysplasia. And they said, no, this dog can't have hip dysplasia because before he was neutered, he was humping my kids and he's using his hips to do that. So there's no way this dog's in pain. And it just completely blows my mind because, if you've got a sore shoulder, you're going to reach for that chocolate bar on the top shelf, or you're not going to do it because you've got a sore. I don't know. Yeah, pain is definitely a big one, but we also need to look at environmental factors. We need to look at ourselves. Everyone's so quick to blame dogs without actually taking a look at themselves and their behavior in the environment and what they're expecting that dog to manage. Maybe a dog's got noise sensitivity. Again, that can be driven by pain. There's just so many things. And I think this is why it's really important to start off with a trainer, and we need these professionals that are prepared to refer on to people with more knowledge than themselves. We can't be having egos in these jobs. All the best behaviourists I know, if they hit a glass ceiling and they've sort of looked into everything that they understand and they can't find a reason, they'll be referring on to veterinary behaviourists, vets who are properly qualified behaviourists as well. Most vets don't have good behaviour knowledge. I've heard some absolutely abhorrent advice coming from veterinary professionals when it comes to behaviour. And I think more vets need to let go of the fact that they don't know what they don't know. They're great at what they do. A lot of them are not great at behaviour. They need to be referring on to good vet behaviourists. And I think there's a lot of professionals that sort of have the attitude of, well, if I can't help, nobody can, and this must be a lost cause. I think we need to be getting second opinions, and we need to be, yeah, I think it needs to just become normalised, getting second opinions and networking and trying to get the right answers.
What I've seen so far is that people get really desperate before they look for help. And at that point, they're already kind of like, they'll just take anyone. The first person who speaks with confidence, and sound legit, they'll take it. You know what I mean? It's just trying to, I guess, solve a problem as quickly as possible because they've left it so long before they took action.
Sometimes it's really simple. When you really start digging into it with people, there was a couple whose dog was really snapping at the children and they were getting really concerned. And when they talked through everything with me, this dog, so the children were homeschooled, so there was always a busy household, always lots going on. And the kids were allowed to climb into the dog's bed whenever they fancied. The dog didn't have anywhere they could go and rest. This dog was so tired, so tired. And once I said to them, look, just humour me and try this. A safe space for them to go. You can put a baby pen round it, stop the kids going to them, or draw a line on the floor, or get like coloured tape and tape it onto the lino. So we've got a visual line that we could teach the children. We don't go past this line. And give your dog plenty of time to get good rest and sleep. A couple of weeks later, they're ringing me up saying we've got a different dog here. Like, it can sometimes just be that simple. So yeah, it's good sometimes. I like to dig into it with people on the phone because sometimes you can just go, oh, I can see where there might be an issue here. Sometimes that's not all of it, but sometimes it is. So I think we do need to think outside the box, but we need to look at basic needs before we start saying, well, I want a dog to behave like this. The way I'm going to do that is put a prong collar on them, or I'm going to put an e-collar on them and zap them, or I'm going to shout at them. I'm going to, remove their favorite thing or use punishment. Or why don't we just look at what the dog is asking? We need to really think about the fact that behavior is communication. They don't have any other way to communicate with us. So if a dog is doing something out of the ordinary or a bit bizarre or a bit problematic to humans, as some would say, we need to be asking ourselves why. What are they trying to communicate? What is it that they need? What do we need to give them?
It's really hard. Yeah, really, really hard to do that because it requires a shift in perspective or just a way of thinking and looking at dogs because we tend to think about them as, they are here and they need to fit into our world. But ultimately, they're trying to communicate with us all day, every day. And being able to see, really see, is I feel like such a skill. And it's also for me anyway, is such a welcome challenge. I find it so intriguing and so interesting to try and pick up on the subtle ways that Duna's trying to communicate with me. Something as simple as when I go to put her harness on, does she lift her head or does she turn away completely? She's telling me, I don't want to go for a walk. I don't need to go for a wee right now. Silly things like that. You just think like, wow. Or she'll come to me and she'll just like, put her little snoot underneath my hand or my arm or something, and that means please pet me. Little things like that. I just think it's so beautiful when you tune in It really strengthens the bond with the dog, and it becomes something really special and magical.
That's what makes you the perfect foster carer, honestly. If everyone thought like that, then rescues would be so thrilled.
Oh, do you know what? I think a lot of it, I don't want to take all that credit because I do have the time. I don't have any other dependents. But I do think that, yeah, you have to be present for it. And I think a lot of families are really busy and, especially with our kids, there's a lot of pressures that take you away from the present moment. So it's really hard to focus on the dog and the dog's needs in those moments, because you're just in survival mode yourself. So I can understand why people don't tune in more than they tune out. But it is so important for, I guess, the well-being of the dog over the long term, because ultimately, you know, it's like you said, the dogs are captive, and what kind of experience are we giving them over the entire duration of their lives? It's so, if I died and came back in another life as a dog, I would hope I would end up in a lovely, caring family that tuned in rather than tuned out. So yeah. What are some of the behaviors that you've seen in dogs after they've been, given up or rescued? Kind of like, how do they adapt after they're no longer with their guardian, their original guardians?
Some better than others. I think people expect that if a dog has been rescued from suboptimal conditions or downright awful conditions, that they're going to sort of be really grateful and really pleased. But actually, when you're taking a traumatized individual out, everything they know, everything that's familiar, everything that they can depend on, even if they can depend on the fact that no one's going to bring them food, it completely shakes their world and their foundations. And sometimes they do completely fall apart because and obviously they don't know where you've taken them. They don't understand what your intentions are. They don't know who you are. And when dogs get surrendered into rescues from families, yeah, sometimes they're curled up in the corner of the kennel, broken. There's loads of like videos on social media of like absolutely broken dogs just sat with their head down in the corner of the kennel. Sometimes you get big explosive behaviors and they get really big feelings and they don't understand what's going on. Sometimes they just mentally and emotionally shut down. Sometimes they sail through and they just come in and say, right, who's got the treats? And they seem to adapt really well. But yeah, I do think it's something that people don't think enough about when they want to give up a dog, especially when their reasons are seemingly quite trivial for wanting to give a dog up. I don't think they really realise the impact that's going to have.
On the dog after they're out of sight.
Yeah, and I think even dogs coming out of kennels going into a home, as much as, yeah, when they settle into that home, they're going to absolutely love it. But to start with, depends on how long they've been there. They know when their walk is coming, what time food is happening. They know all their handlers there. If they then go into a home and then you've got Auntie Sally and all of the cousins round the next day to meet you, and they're all in your face, and you don't know what's going on. You don't know these people, and everyone's trying to touch you, and they're in your face, and it's terrifying. And I don't think
Yeah,
people really think about that. You can't have visitors, you can't be doing these things because we will never truly understand how each other perceives the world. You and I, humans that can have a discussion about this, let alone
yeah,
people, animals that we can't communicate with. We will never truly understand their perception and the way that they navigate the world and the way they see things and their lived experience. So we just got to do the best that we can. I think anyone that's sort of coming in saying, "Yeah, give me some money and I will get this dog to perform in this way that you want, so that they fit into your life," and they're just completely looking past the fact that there is an individual here that no one's listening to. It's just far too common. It's far too common. People's expectations are absolutely ridiculous. They just want these individuals to come in and sort of become part of the furniture, with very little effort, and it's just
yeah.
doesn't work like that.
It's the fantasy. That's what I've realized. There's a fantasy through the media, through social media, like it all builds to get this idea of what it would be like. And the reality is quite different. It's very revealing. It can be confronting, but it's also really beautiful. It's so much more magical than I thought it was going to be. So again, like, yeah, positive, negative, depending on your outlook, but yeah, it is a real mixed bag, like it would be with another human being, but this being is completely reliant and dependent on you. So it's a massive responsibility that people definitely should not take lightly, especially around Christmas time. So I've never heard of decompression before I got Duna, and now I understand the importance of giving the dog grace for the duration of a decompression period. For those who might not know, what is a decompression period? What does it look like?
Well, it's an indefinite period of time where anybody, us or dogs, we need to sort of calm our nervous system and get to know our new environment and our new surroundings. And really, a dog is really taking you in and getting to know you and finding out all about you and your lifestyle and what might be expected of them. And it's such an overwhelming time, and it can be for months. So we need to just expect very little. We need to be very, very open to learning from the dog all about who they are and what they need from us. We need to be very selfless, and really mindful of their experience and what they might be going through. We don't have friends visiting. We don't go out and leave them for hours on end. We don't expect them to cope with going to busy places and sitting in cafes and pubs. And, we can look at it like a bucket, a stress bucket. So you have, the dog's got their bucket, and first thing in the morning, they might need a wee, and they might be house trained, so they might know that it's not ideal to go indoors. And that sort of stress of waiting to be let out fills up their stress bucket a little bit. So you let them out, they come back. Then you're making breakfast in the kitchen and you drop a food bowl on the floor and it clangs and makes a noise and it makes them jump, and then it fills the stress bucket up a little bit more. And then the window cleaner comes and that's very spooky, and that fills it up a little bit more. And then you take them out for a walk and then a loud car goes past and then another dog barks at them, and then we're filling up that stress bucket even more. And then Aunt Sally comes over and starts poking and touching you. And then you're trying to sleep, but you're in a terrace house and you can hear the neighbours, and it's very concerning because you can hear a dog barking next door and you don't know whether they can get to you. Stress bucket's even more full. All of a sudden, the stress bucket is overflowing. The dog's either shutting down or having big feelings and big behaviours, and people say, that came out of nowhere. It came out of nowhere. It didn't come out of nowhere. It was building up the whole time, and they weren't paying attention. And what decompression is all about is not filling up that stress bucket, like doing everything we can to not fill up the stress bucket, but also poking holes in the bottom of the bucket to drain the stress back out. Licking activities, sniffing, back molar, chewing, all really good thing. Making sure they're having plenty of sleep, not asking too much of them, and just really allowing that cortisol to settle.
Yeah.
And then that can take months. It really can take months. People underestimate how long that actually takes. And every time a dog has a stressful experience, even if it doesn't seem stressful to us in their world, if they perceive that as stressful, then they are going to have very real stress hormones that we can test and find in their system. And it's going to take maybe 36 hours for that to settle. So if you do take them out for a walk and they get overwhelmed, they might not want to walk for the next 3 days. They just might want to do some licking, sniffing, chewing activities, a bit of free work. Go on YouTube, type in ACE free work, Sarah Fisher. All of these things we can do indoors, empty the stress bucket. Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. I guess it's also understanding that the decompression period is not the time for teaching a dog how to sit, how to, all that kind of stuff. It's not, kind of the period to how do I say this? Yeah, to be firm. I kind of feel that like that's a natural instinct for people when they receive a dog out of fear of potential poor behaviors, perceived poor behaviors manifesting later along the line. They try and kind of like nip it in the bud early on and be like, oh, must get the dog to do X, Y, Z. Things like recall. Why is this specific period of time not optimal for teaching a dog new things?
The most important thing during this time is trust. It's earning their trust. It's letting them know that you're going to listen to them, you're going to hear them, and yeah, to feel safe. The number one most important thing is for a dog to feel safe, physically, emotionally, socially. Without that feeling of safety, you have no foundation for training. We shouldn't be doing any sort of training. For me, I'm not super interested in training. I'm interested in well-being. So we teach life skills. If they need to be on a lead for their own safety, we need them to feel comfortable. We need to understand what's going on. We need them to feel comfortable with that handling, because as a society, we put that on them. And the very least we can do is make sure that they're comfortable with that and they understand what's going on there. So we do life skills is important. We don't want to be running out in roads. We don't want to be, you know, all sorts of things that might be dangerous for them. But for me, the most important thing is the dog not to be performing and doing tricks. It's really just for them to feel safe and to trust their human. And I think that is the biggest mark of success on the journey, is getting to that point where they trust you, and then they can feel safe around you when things are scary out in the real world. You're their base and they know that you're gonna support them and you're going to listen and you're going to take them away from scary things, not walk them towards scary things. You're going to be paying attention, listening to their body language and really understanding what they can and can't cope with. And that is the foundation of everything. If you skip that in the beginning and you start bullying a dog, telling them what to do and getting all interested in all of these really unimportant things, it might be something that's important to you, but yeah, I just think there's a time and a place, and the beginning is not the time and the place for that. Dogs are very intelligent. They want to learn. They want to, that they do want to live a harmonious life with us, because they have to live with us. And if they understand, then, maybe they'll listen, but maybe not. Maybe we're asking them to do something that's not preferable. Maybe we want them to sit and they have got a sore hip. And then we're punishing them for not sitting and not complying with what we want, but they can't because they're sore. So if you can't read the dog and you're not understanding them and you haven't got to know them and watched exactly how they are when they're just them, what they choose to do, what they feel comfortable with, what they enjoy, what their natural choices are. Yeah, how can you train when you have no foundation? And you can't train a dog. If a dog is in pain, like with Duna, where you found out that the behaviours that she's exhibiting now are a bit tricky. Oh, it's a pain response. You can't train someone out of a pain response. You
Yeah.
can't suppress someone's pain response.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's your foundation.
It's so easy to expect something or someone or to adapt better than we do, but actually, it's only been a month. It's only been just over a month with my foster dog. Like, these things take time, and so that patience is super important, I feel. So yeah. Jenna, I am so grateful to have had you on the podcast. I really, really enjoyed our chat. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.